The sickening, unnatural crack of rapidly shifting bones echoed violently through the tiny border cottage. It was absolutely not a sound a 3-year-old child was ever supposed to make. Lena fell to her knees on the rotting wooden floorboards, watching in absolute, breathless horror as her tiny son violently transformed. He did not shift into the standard, fragile form of a low-born omega pup. He erupted into massive, heavily muscled, terrifyingly dominant apex predator whose heavy paws literally crushed the floorboards beneath them. Outside the frosted window, the blinding red beams of heavy tactile flashlights suddenly sliced through the freezing, torrential rain. Heavily armed mercenaries had completely surrounded the isolated tavern, and the heavy metallic click of pulse, rifles cocking echoed over the howling wind. 60 seconds. That was exactly how much time Lena had before the heavy oak door was violently breached and the High Chancellor's executioners slaughtered her only child. Imagine carrying the most dangerous, devastating secret in the entire kingdom in absolute silence, only to have the darkest monsters of your past finally hunt you down. If you absolutely love fiercely protective mothers who refuse to go down without a brutal, cinematic fight, take a deep breath and hit that subscribe button right now to join a pack that never surrenders. The digital timer on the mercenaries' breaching charge loudly beep, rapidly counting down from 30 seconds. Lena did not panic, and she absolutely did not weep. She reached under the floorboards, her pale fingers wrapping tight around a heavy, loaded silver pistol, and the thick, leather-bound dossier of treason she had patiently protected for 3 long years. The time for hiding was permanently over. The biting, sub-zero wind violently whipped through the splintered gaps in the rotting wooden walls, carrying the heavy, suffocating scent of wet pine and impending death. Lena tightened her frail, trembling arms around the massive, midnight black wolf pup huddled desperately against her freezing chest. He was completely terrified of his own gigantic, unfamiliar form. His heavy, razor-sharp claws helplessly gouging deep tracks in the frozen floorboards. It was a brutal, undeniable biological testament to his dominant royal bloodline, and it was the exact death sentence they had spent 3 agonizing years running from. As Lena stroked his thick, coarse fur, the freezing, dilapidated border cottage violently faded from her vision. She was instantly, aggressively pulled back to the polished, pristine marble floors of the royal throne room exactly 3 years ago. High Chancellor Fenn had maliciously transformed a deeply private, spiritual severing into massive, theatrical public execution of her character. He had intentionally gathered the maximum number of aristocratic witnesses, ensuring the absolute, inescapable legal finality of her humiliating exile. Alpha King Kale had stood towering above her on the gilded dais, his broad shoulders completely rigid, his striking golden eyes utterly devoid of any recognizable emotion. When he spoke the ancient, irreversible words of the mate rejection, the deep, rumbling baritone of his voice physically struck her chest like a heavy, iron battering ram. The invisible, spiritual tether connecting their souls violently snapped, sending a devastating, agonizing shockwave directly through her central nervous system. The entire assembled court held their collective breath, eagerly waiting for the weak, low-born Archivist to violently collapse into a pathetic, weeping mess on the polished floor. But Lena did absolutely nothing. She stood perfectly, terrifyingly still in the exact center, the vast ceremonial chamber. Her heart was violently tearing into 1,000 jagged, bleeding pieces, but her face remained a cold, impenetrable mask of carved porcelain. She completely refused to give the smirking High Chancellor the satisfying, pathetic spectacle he had so meticulously engineered. She stood there in absolute, deafening silence, knowing a devastating, apocalyptic secret that would have completely leveled the entire palace. Buried deep within her womb, exactly 8 weeks along, the tiny, fragile height of the undisputed royal heir fluttered against the agonizing, crushing weight of his father's cruel rejection. But the unborn child was absolute not the only devastating secret. Lena was quiet carrying out the heavy oak doors. For an entire month preceding the ceremony, she had utilized her invisible, completely overlooked status as a royal archivist to meticulously stalk the shadows of the high court. She had recorded every single treasonous whisper, every illegal financial transaction, and every corrupt political bribe between High Chancellor Fen and his greedy co-conspirators. She was a master of historical documentation, reserving the absolute, unvarnished truth was her deepest, ingrained biological reflex. Now, resting securely beneath the rotting floorboards of the freezing cottage, was a thick, heavy leather dossier binding their inevitable, bloody doom. It was permanently sealed with the glowing, crimson wax stamp of the ancient order of Archivists, a high classified, magical insignia that commanded absolute, unquestionable legal authority across the entire continent. For 3 brutal, agonizing years, that heavy ledger had been her only weapon against the monsters who stole her life. She had traded the luxurious, heated velvet chambers of the royal palace for a life of suffocating, bone-crushing poverty on the very edge of the frozen wasteland. Lena had violently scrubbed the blood-stained floors of local mercenary taverns until her pale knuckles cracked and continuously bled into the soapy water. She had willingly starved for entire days at a time, surviving solely on melted snow, just to ensure her rapidly growing body had a single, warm bowl of thin potato broth. She had completely swallowed her pride, her royal destiny, and her own happiness to keep her tiny, innocent son entirely hidden from the political assassins who would gladly slaughter him in his sleep. Every single day was a suffocating, exhausting battle for basic, fundamental survival in a world that had completely discarded her. Have you ever had to quietly swallow a massive, humiliating heartbreak just to fiercely protect someone you love with your entire soul? If you know the exhausting, heavy burden of silently carrying a massive sacrifice while the entire world cruelly judges you, drop a white rose in the comments below. We absolutely see your quiet, unyielding strength, and your beautiful sacrifices will never be forgotten. The massive, midnight black wolf pup whimpered softly against her freezing collarbone, violently pulling her back to the terrifying, urgent present. The blinding red lasers sights of the mercenary execution squad swept aggressively across the frost-covered glass of the tiny window. The time for absolute, silent suffering was permanently over. The heavy, melancholic weight of her lonely exile immediately evaporated, rapidly replaced by the cold, calculating wrath of a mother pushed entirely to the edge of the abyss. She gripped the heavy silver pistol in her right hand, completely prepared to paint the rotting wooden floorboards entirely red. The heavy breaching charge detonated with a deafening, concussive roar. The massive oak door of the border cottage violently exploded inward, completely ripped from its rusted iron hinges, sending a lethal, catastrophic shower of jagged wooden splinters tearing through the freezing air. Lena did not flinch, and she absolutely did not scream. She positioned her fragile, trembling body directly in front of the massive, shivering wolf pup, raising her heavy silver pistol with absolute, terrifyingly steady precision. 3 heavily armored mercenaries stormed through the smoking threshold, their heavy tactile boots crushing the remaining floorboards. Their glowing red laser sights sliced through the dark room, painting lethal targets directly on her chest. They were massive, ruthless killers, completely devoid of any human empathy. The lead executioner raised his pulse rifle, his finger aggressively tightening on the heavy steel trigger, fully prepared to execute the High Chancellor's brutal orders. But the fatal gunshock absolutely never came. The ambient temperature inside the destroyed cabin plummeted so rapidly that the thick smoke from the explosive charge froze into suspended, glittering crystals of ice. The howling, freeze wind outside violently died, immediately replaced by a suffocating, crushy atmospheric gravity that physically forced the oxygen directly out of the room. A towering, heavily armored silhouette stepped smooth through the ruined doorway, completely blocking out the raging storm behind him. It was Alpha King Kale. He did not draw a heavy broadsword, and he did not issue a loud royal command. He simply raised his heavy, gauntleted hand and executed a single, devastating, backhanded swipe through the empty air. The sheer, localized kinetic force of his dominant alpha aura hit the 3 massive mercenaries with the concussive, unstoppable power of a runaway freight train. Their heavy kinetic armor violently buckled under the invisible pressure. They were effortlessly lifted entirely off their feet and hurled violently backward through the shattered doorway, crashing heavily into the frozen, snow-covered trees outside. They were completely incapacitated in a fraction of a single second, devoid of any unmonetizable blood or gore, entirely neutralized by pure, supernatural psychological force. Kale stepped over the splintered threshold, his broad, heavy shoulders visibly heaving. He had spent the last 3 agonizing years desperately tearing his own kingdom apart, secretly investigating the sprawling, malignant corruption of High Chancellor Fen. He had finally tracked the rogue mercenaries to this isolated, freezing wasteland, fully intending to interrogate them about the Council's treason. He had absolute no idea who was hiding inside the ruined cottage, until he took a single, deep breath of the freezing, stagnant air. The heavy scent of burnt gunpowder and wet pine was violently, entirely obliterated by intoxicating, hauntingly familiar biological aroma. It smelled exact like ancient parchment, sweet lavender, and quiet, unyielding defiance. The ancient, primordial mate bond that had been forcefully, illegally severed 3 years ago did not just awaken. It violently, aggressively exploded inside his broad chest with the catastrophic force of a direct lightning strike. The severed metaphysical tether rapidly regenerated, sending white, hot electrical sparks shooting directly through his entire nervous system. The massive, brutal inner wolf inside his mind let out a deafening, frantic roar of absolute, agonizing reverence. The deep, primal pour violently vibrated directly through Cale's heavy ribs, physically paralyzing his massive, armored limbs. Have you ever believed a beautiful chapter of your life was permanently closed, only to have destiny violently kick the door open and give you a breathtaking second chance? If you know the overwhelming, heavy shock of finally getting back exactly what you lost, drop a crown in the comments below. We know true love absolutely cannot be permanently severed by cruel, manipulative lies, and the truth always hunts down the guilty. Cale stumbled a heavy, unbalanced step forward, his heavy combat boots crunching loudly on the frozen floorboards. His striking golden eyes, normally a cold, impenetrable mask of strict royal authority, dilated so wide they appeared completely pitch black. He stared down at the pale, fiercely protective woman kneeling in the rubble. It was Lena, the fragile, low-born archivist he had publicly humiliated and discarded. He had foolishly, blindly believed the corrupt council when they claimed she was a traitor, and he had spent every single night since the rejection ceremony drowning in suffocating, empty regret. But the devastating shocks violently assaulting his central nervous system were absolutely not over. Cale shifted his desperate, tear-filled gaze just a fraction of an inch downward, hiding securely behind Lena's trembling legs, aggressively baring his tiny white fangs in a desperate attempt to protect his mother, was a massive, midnight black wolf pup. The child was completely gigantic for his age, possessed the thick, heavy muscular structure exclusively reserved for the highest, most dominant echelons of the royal alpha bloodline. The terrified pup whimpered softly, pressing his heavy, wet nose against Lena's palm, seeking reassurance from the only protector he had ever known. And then, the massive pup looked directly up at the towering king. Cale completely stopped breathing. The massive, towering sovereign of the entire continent was violently struck by a paralyzing, irrefutable biological truth. The tiny, frightened wolf staring back at him possessed exact, undeniable, glowing golden eyes. They were the exact, legendary eyes of his ancient, royal ancestors. The horrific, paradigm-shifting realization hit the Alpha King with the devastating, crushing weight of a collapsing mountain. High Chancellor Fen had not just manipulated him into discarding his fated mate. The corrupt council had deliberately, maliciously forced him to blindly, unknowingly discard his only biological heir, abandoning a royal prince to completely starve in the freezing wilderness. His massive, armored hands began to violently shake. The realization that he had been entirely absent for the most critical years of his own son's life ripped a gaping, bleeding hole directly into his soul. He had missed his child's first breath, his first steps, and this terrifying, agonizing first shift, all because of a meticulously orchestrated political lie. Lena did not lower her heavy silver pistol. She kept the lethal weapon aimed directly at the king's broad chest. She had spent 3 brutal years learning to survive completely without him, and she was absolutely not going to surrender her son to the man who had publicly destroyed her. The sheer, absolute magnitude of the betrayal threatened to completely shatter the king's mind. The suffocating silence in the ruined cabin was suddenly the loudest, most agonizing sound Kael had ever experienced in his entire immortal existence. The heavy, suffocating silence between the almighty Alpha King and his fiercely protective mate was abruptly, violently shattered by the loud crunch of expensive leather boots on the frozen snow. High Chancellor Fen stepped arrogantly through the shattered doorway of the ruined border cottage. He was flanked by a fresh, heavily armed squad of elite royal guards. His pristine, fur-lined velvet cloak was entirely untouched by the freezing, torrential rain. He walked with the sickening, confident swagger of a man who firmly believed he owned the entire world and everyone living inside of it. Fen carefully surveyed the absolute destruction of the cabin with a cold, condescending sneer. He looked directly at the massive, midnight black wolf pup cowering desperately behind Lina's trembly legs. He looked at the heavy silver pistol aimed firmly in her pale hand. He did not immediately recognize the towering, heavily armored silhouette of his king, standing motionless in the dark, suffocating shadows of the room. Fen foolishly, arrogantly believed his own paid mercenaries had finally cornered the elusive, exiled Archivist and her bastard child. A magnificent, tragic waste of valuable royal resources, Fen announced loudly, his voice dripping with absolute, poisonous contempt. 3 miserable years of hiding in the freezing mud, only to breed a monstrous, heretical abomination. Lena did not lower her heavy weapon. Her pale, bruised finger remained securely fastened against the heavy steel trigger. She glared at the High Chancellor with absolute, unyielding hatred. She was entirely prepared to die violently defending her son. The child is a severe biological anomaly, Fen continued, completely misreading the terrifying, paralyzing tension heavily saturating the small room. He is a dangerous, volatile threat to the strict purity of the High Court. Execute the mother immediately. Burn the beast alive. Leave absolute no trace of this pathetic, treasonous bloodline. The elite royal guards raised their heavy, magically charged pulse rifles. They aimed directly at the massive pup. Kael moved. He did not speak. He did not draw his heavy royal broadsword. He simply unleashed his ancient soul. The world broke. The ambient air instantly crystallized. The temperature plummeted into absolute zero. A suffocating, apocalyptic gravity violently slammed directly in the rotting floorboards. It was not a physical attack. It was pure, unfiltered, cinematic psychological devastation. Heavy kinetic armor of the elite guards violently collapsed. The high-density steel crumpled like cheap, discarded paper. The heavily armed men were instantly, brutally forced down onto their knees. They could not breathe. They could not move a single muscle. The agonizing, sickening sound of their heavy collarbones loudly cracking under sheer atmospheric pressure echoed like gunfire through the cabin. There was absolutely no blood. There was no unmonetizable, gratuitous gore. There was only the flawless, terrifying application of absolute, ancient supernatural dominance. Their lethal weapons shattered into useless, jagged dust. Their highly trained minds were entirely broken by the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the king's uncontrollable wrath. Fen completely froze. His arrogant, triumphant sneer violently melted off his weathered, wrinkled face. The heavy, suffocating pressure physically crushed his lungs, completely stealing his breath. He stumbled a desperate, unbalanced step backward. He finally looked deep in the dark shadows. He finally saw the glowing, catastrophic golden eyes of Alpha King Kale. The High Chancellor realized, with a sudden, suffocating wave of pure, unadulterated terror, that he had just loudly ordered the brutal execution of the royal Heir directly in front of the apex predator of the entire continent. Kale stepped fully into the dim, flickering light. His massive, heavily armored chest heaved with a violent wrath that completely defied all earthly logic. His striking golden eyes burned with the catastrophic heat of 1,000 dying suns. "Heretical abomination," Kale repeated. His deep, rumbling voice did not just echo. It physically vibrated directly in the marrow of Fen's violently shaking bones. The concussive, kinetic shockwave of his demonic tone shattered the remaining frost-covered glass of the cottage windows. The atmospheric pressure inside the ruined cottage continued to aggressively multiply, completely defying the natural laws of physics. The remaining wooden beams of the ceiling loudly groaned, spider webbing with thick, jagged cracks and the sheer magnitude of Kale's supernatural dominance. The freezing snow blowing through the shattered doorway was instantly incinerated before it could even touch the floorboard, completely vaporized by the blistering, overwhelming heat radiating from the king's heavily armored body. Fen collapsed heavily on the ruined floorboards. His expensive, polished leather boots slipped uselessly on the frozen, splintered wood. He gasped desperately, frantically searching for a single breath of oxygen. But the alpha aura was a flawless, impenetrable vacuum of death. "My king," Fen choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched, desperate wheeze. "You do not understand the heavy burden, the royal council, the political stability of the realm. She was a low-born liability. I was fiercely protecting your glorious, untarnished reign." "You severed my eternal soul," Kale whispered. The king took a single, thunderous step forward. The rotting floorboards completely pulverized into fine dust beneath his heavy combat boots. "You publicly ordered the slaughter of my queen," Kale stated, his voice completely devoid of any recognizable human mercy. He took exactly one more slow, deliberate step. "You maliciously condemn my only son to completely freeze in the dark." Kale reached out his massive, heavy, gauntleted hand. He absolutely did not touch the corrupt chancellor. He simply closed his heavily armored fist in the empty, freeze air. Fen was violently lifted entirely off the ground by an invisible, crushing, supernatural vice. The High Chancellor kicked his legs helplessly in the freezing, empty air. His weathered face rapidly turned a sickening, violent shade of purple. The invisible, crushing pressure wrapped completely around his throat, entirely cutting off his pathetic, treasonous excuses forever. Every second Fen remained conscious was an eternity of flawless, meticulously calculated psychological torture. The High Chancellor was finally forced to comprehend the absolute, devastating magnitude of his monumental mistake. He had not merely manipulated a political marriage. He had actively, maliciously waged war against the primordial forces of nature, attempting to completely sever a sacred bond forged by the ancient gods themselves. Have you ever watched an arrogant, cruel manipulator suddenly realize they just cornered a sleeping dragon? If you absolutely live to see a vicious tyrant violently put in his place, hit that like button right now to watch this traitor fall. We know that absolute justice is always served to those who maliciously prey on the innocent. Lena stood perfect still behind the towery king. She slowly, cautiously lowered her heavy silver pistol. The massive, midnight black wolf pup entirely stopped whimpering. He stared directly up at the towering, terrifying giant with absolute, unconditional, breathless awe. The tiny pup instinctively recognized the unmatched, ancient strength of his true, fiercely protective father. Kale held the High Chancellor securely suspended in the air. The king's wrath was a beautiful, terrifying, unstoppable force of nature. He was systematically dismantling the corrupt foundation of his own strong empire, perfectly willing to burn the entire royal court to ash just to avenge the silent tears of his fated mate. Kale stared at the gasping, broken body of the man who had stolen his family. He could have effortlessly crushed Fenn's skull into fine white powder. He could have painted the entire freezing forest completely red with the blood of the treasonous guards. But Kale refused to become a mindless, brutal monster directly in front of his terrified son. He refused to let his first interaction with his only child be permanently stained by the sickening stench of actual, physical slaughter. The king possessed absolute, unquestionable power, but he also possessed the strict, ironclad discipline required to perfectly leash it. Fenn's eyes rolled back completely into his head. His expensive, fur-lined cloak was completely ruined by the freezing mud and his own abject, paralyzing terror. He was entirely paralyzed, completely broken, entirely defeated with a single drop of royal blood being shed. Kale casually, effortlessly flicked his heavy armored wrist. The invisible, supernatural vice violently threw the High Chancellor across the entire room. Fenn crashed heavily against the thick, solid stone of the ruined fireplace, instant losing consciousness. He slumped uselessly on the floorboards, his political reign of terror permanently, beautifully extinguished by the undisputed, almighty sovereign of the realm. The suffocating, terrifying storm of the king's wrath finally began to settle, leaving absolute nothing but pure, unadulterated devastation in its wake. The suffocating, heavy atmospheric pressure slowly evaporated from the ruined border cottage, leaving absolutely nothing but a deathly, breathless silence in its devastating wake. The frozen snowflakes suspended in the air finally drifted gently to the splintered floorboards. High Chancellor Fenn and his elite mercenary guards remained completely paralyzed in the dark shadows, their treasonous reign violently, permanently extinguished by a singular display of unquestionable authority. Alpha King Kale did not even spare the unconscious men a second glance. His towering, heavily armored back remained turned to the broken traitors. With a slow, deliberate wave of his gauntleted hand, a heavy, magical staff field locked the mercenaries entirely in the rotting wood. They would awaken in the deepest, lightless subterranean cells of the Obsidian Keep, entirely stripped of their noble titles and completely erased from historical existence. The brutal, uncompromising god of war had perfectly executed his terrible wrath. But as Kale slowly turned to face the dark corner of the ruined cabin, the terrifying, apocalyptic apex predator completely vanished. He looked at the delicate, fiercely protective woman standing defensively in the rubble, completely exhausted but utterly unbroken. He looked at the massive, midnight black wolf pup huddled against her trembling legs. The sheer, devastating reality of his monumental failure crashed in his broad chest with the catastrophic force of a collapsing star. Kale reached up with violently shaking hands and rapidly unlatched the heavy, blood-red iron clasps of his royal breastplate. He completely stripped away his heavy gauntlets, tossing the lethal instruments of war directly into the freezing snow. He absolutely refused to touch his fragile, traumatized family with the cold, unforgiving steel of his violent empire. The almighty Alpha King, the undisputed sovereign of the entire continent, took 3 slow, agonizingly careful steps forward. And then, the legendary Brutal did the absolute unthinkable. He dropped heavily on his armored knees, directly on the splintered, frozen floorboards. He bowed his proud, crowned head, completely surrendering his royal dominance, his overwhelming pride, and his entire immortal soul to the low-born Archivist he had once publicly discarded. The blistering, oppressive heat of his alpha aura rapidly cooled, seamlessly transforming into a warm, deeply comforting biological blanket. It smelled exactly like a crackling hearth fire, old parchment, and overwhelming, desperate love. Have you ever been forced to carry a heavy, invisible burden entirely by yourself for so long that you completely forgot what it felt like to actually be held? If you know the breathtaking, overwhelming relief of finally being allowed to safely fall apart in the arms of someone who truly sees your immense pain, leave a white dove in the comments below. We know the absolute heaviest armor we ever wear is the silent strength we use to aggressively protect our broken hearts. Kale slowly lifted his gaze. His striking golden eyes, once cold and distant in the royal throne room, were now entirely flooded with heavy, unshed tears. "I was completely blind," Kale whispered, his deep, rumbling voice breaking completely under the crushing weight of his agonizing guilt. "I let them deliberately poison my mind. I let them maliciously convince me that the other half of my eternal soul was a political liability. I stood on a gilded throne and violently banished my entire world into the freezing dark." Lena stared down at the crying giant. Her heavy silver pistol finally slipped from her pale, trembling fingers, hitting the floorboards with a dull, heavy thud. For 3 brutal years, she had meticulously built a fortress of solid ice around her shattered heart. But watching the almighty king weep in the freezing ruins of her miserable cottage, the thick, defensive walls violently collapse. The massive, midnight black wolf pup cautiously stepped out from behind his mother's legs. He slowly approached the towering king, his heavy paws navigating the broken wood with clumsy innocence. Kale held his breath, absolute terrified that his son would instinctively reject him. But the tiny, courageous pup pressed his heavy, wet nose directly against Kale's trembling, bare palm. A violent, agonizing sob tore directly from the king's throat. Kale gently wrapped his massive arms around the giant pup, pulling his son tightly against his rapidly beating heart For the very first time, he buried his face in the thick, coarse midnight fur, breathed in the precious, undeniable scent of his own royal bloodline. "I am so deeply sorry, my beautiful boy," Kel choked out, fervently kissing the top of the pup's head. "I completely missed your first breath. I missed your beautiful first shift. I swear by the ancient gods, I will spend the rest of my immortal existence earning the absolute right to call myself your father." Kale then shifted his desperate, tear-filled gaze up to Lena. He reached out his wide, scarred hand, offering his wide palm in absolute, unconditional surrender. "My brilliant, fierce queen," Kale pleaded, a single tear cutting a clean path down his weathered face. "Please, come back to the light. You never have to fight a single battle in the dark ever again." Lena did not collapse into weeping, hysterical mess. She was a master royal archivist, and her disciplined mind was a meticulously organized weapon. She slowly knelt in the ruined rubble directly across from her fated mate. She reached deep into the hidden, hollowed-out compartment beneath the rotting floorboards. She pulled out the thick, heavy leather-bound dossier sealed securely with the glowing, crimson wax stamp of the ancient order of archivists. It was the exact, highly classified documentation of every single treasonous bribe, illegal transaction, and corrupt whisper High Chancellor Fenn had ever executed to destroy their bond. Lena gently placed the heavy dossier directly in the king's massive, trembling hand. "I absolutely did not need you to fight my battles for me, my king," Lena whispered, her voice a cold, breathtaking melody of absolute triumph. "I merely needed you to finally wake up. This is the exact fuel we need to burn their corrupt empire entirely to the ground. Now, let us go take back our throne." The heavy, reinforced obsidian doors of the royal council chamber were not merely opened, they were violently thrown wide open by the towering Alpha King. The echoing, deafening slam instantly silenced every single corrupt aristocrat gathered inside the grand hall. 3 brutal years ago, Lena had walked out of this exact ceremonial chamber as a humiliated, silent, and pregnant exile. Today, she returned as the undisputed, fiercely crowned Luna of the entire continent, her presence commanding absolute, breathless reverence. She did not wear the simple, drab linen robes of a low-born archivist. She wore a breathtaking, flowy gown of midnight silk, and resting perfectly in her dark hair was the legendary, ancient silver diadem of the royal queen. Her pale, beautiful face was a flawless, impenetrable mask of absolute, calculated triumph. Alpha King Kale walked proudly by her side, his massive, heavily armored frame radiating a dominant, fiercely protective aura that completely suffocated the terrified council members. But the absolute most breathtaking sight in the entire royal court was the confident little boy holding his mother's hand. He possessed the thick, dark hair of his mother and the glowing, unmistakable, catastrophic golden eyes of his royal father. He was the living, breathing, undeniable proof of their unbreakable eternal bond. Lena walked directly to the head of the massive oak council table. She did not raise her voice, and she absolutely did not draw a weapon. She simply dropped the heavy, leather-bound dossier on the polished wood. The glowing, crimson wax stamp of the ancient order of archivists gleam brightly under the crystal chandeliers. Bound inside those heavy pages was the meticulously documented, absolute political destruction of every sing traitor trembly in the room. The most terrifying, devastating weapon in the entire kingdom is never a sharpened broadsword or a mindless, violent army. Is the cold, calculated, unyielding patience of a brilliant mother fiercely protecting her child. When you maliciously force a powerful woman into the freezing dark, you absolutely should not be surprised when she patiently learns to control the terrifying shadows and completely overthrows your corrupt empire. May you always possess the quiet, brilliant strengths to meticulously build your own triumphant return. May your family be endlessly protected by fierce, unwavering love, and may your home always be a warm, impenetrable fortress against the cold, manipulative lies of the world. But the subterranean dungeons beneath the obsidian keep are incredibly deep, and high treason demands a terrifying, heavy price. High Chancellor Fen is currently locked in complete, suffocating darkness, anxiously waiting for his final, brutal judgment. What do you think should be his ultimate, agonizing punishment for daring to sever the royal bloodline? Should the Alpha King execute him publicly in the royal courtyard? Or should the brilliant Luna handle his permanent destruction behind closed doors? Let me know exactly how you would serve absolute justice in the comments below. If your heart is still racing from this epic, cinematic power reversal, make sure to hit that like button and share this incredible tale with your fiercely loyal pack. Subscribe to our channel and turn on those notifications, because the glorious reign of this beautiful, dangerous family has only just begun.